like I was saying, just get out there and start reading, start attending. Like you said, with the pandemic, everything's online.
Do you ever have so many questions and no one to ask, so they're just wasting away on Google searches you'll forget about in an hour or so?
We had that same problem, and that's why we created the RD2BE podcast, a resource for dietetic and nutrition students looking for answers that their peers don't have.
We are students Macy and Emily and registered dietitian Carl Barnes. We engage in conversations and learn from RDs.
Join us weekly as we gain insight into the unique journeys of registered dietitians all over the country.
Welcome back to another week of the RD2BE podcast. I'm your registered dietitian host, Carl Barnes. This is our weekly podcast where we sit down with a different registered dietitian nutritionist each week to showcase the diversity of opportunity in the profession and dismantle the notion that there is a traditional career path in the dietetics field. Really excited to be sitting down with Charlotte Block this week. She is a technical specialist in nutrition, very, very interesting background in what she does and has accomplished. Really excited to delve into it. I'm going to pass it off to Jenna to kick it off.
And I'm Jenna, your RD2BE. And so Charlotte, could you give us a little overview of what your current role is as a dietitian?
Sure, I'm glad to be here. I currently work at a nonprofit. It's a long acronym. There are a lot of acronyms in international development. This one is, it's the National Cooperative Business Association, CLUSA International, but we go by NCBA CLUSA.
And I wonder why.
Sometimes we even just say CLUSA, though we're not supposed to, but it's just easier. Just quick, like the NCBA part is actually a cooperative association for the United States, but the CLUSA part does the international development work, and they work with cooperatives, but also agriculture, market systems, etc. And my role is a lot of the projects that we apply for and implement have a nutrition component, and it's called nutrition sensitive, because it's not straight up like putting food in people's mouths. It's more looking at what's the enabling environment. How can agriculture be a proponent of nutrition, not just income generation, but how can you put healthy diets on plates, basically, and have people understand the importance of what they're eating.
Awesome. So it sounds like a really all-inclusive organization that you work for, and that's really great. And so when we look at your academic background, you actually first got a bachelor's in Asian studies. And so what made you decide to go from that transition of your academic career all the way to nutrition and dietetics?
So yeah, my Bachelor of Arts was in Asian Studies, particularly around Japan, Japanese. And I, being 18 to 21 years old, I thought I was interested in things that were international, but I just didn't really know how to apply it. And so originally I thought economics, that didn't work out so well. So then I thought tourism. And after I got my degree, I spent 1 year working in something called a travel incentive company, where businesses award their top sellers on trips and conferences and things like that. So after a year of that, I decided I wanted to do something that was a little more helpful in the world. And I was interested in the health system. And so thinking about my interests and what I would enjoy, I looked at dietetics, and I went back to school and got a BS instead. And that was in nutrition. It was a coordinated program at the University of Minnesota.
Gotcha. And so I feel like with a lot of dietitians, they sort of stumble across nutrition, or they kind of they don't realize that dietetics is a career option until, especially for second career or second degree dietitians. But for you specifically, how did you find dietetics? Because I see a lot of other dietitians, it's like, oh, I didn't realize it was an option until this point in the road. But for you, did you do some research, or did you also stumble across it?
So several members of my family are pharmacists. So I kind of knew about that angle of the health system. And like I said, I had my own questions about nutrition and diet and what's healthy and what's not. And, if I chug this carton of soy milk, is that good for me? Or, if this thing says organic on it, does that mean that all my health issues go away?
All my problems will disappear.
Right, exactly. And I wanted a degree or an education that, and this is going to age me, that I could open a newspaper and look in the classifieds and know what I was, prepared to do.
Awesome. And so with your interest in global and like international, because we can see with your Bachelor's of Arts initially, you were interested in global, international, that sort of realm. And so what made that interest spark? Do you remember what initially got you interested in global and international stuff to begin with?
I think as I can speculate. I grew up in a university town, and so there was a lot of students that came from other countries. So in my school, in first grade, I had a friend from Japan. I had a friend from Cambodia. I went to high school with, someone from the Dominican Republic and someone else from, I don't remember the country, but Africa. And I also, my mother was very into travel as well. So I had the opportunity to travel a bit internationally with her. I mean, like England. But so that was, oh, sorry. And then, yeah, the Asian studies, I did have my junior year abroad to Japan. So that, further instilled, my interest in other countries, other cultures, other languages.
Yeah, so just great exposure, just kind of getting yourself out there and having that kind of upbringing of, hey, there's so much stuff out there, and it's super interesting, especially once you open yourself up to it. And so one of your earlier roles as a dietitian, you actually worked in the Mercy Corps, and that actually sent you to Afghanistan for a little bit, which is super, like, not a lot of dietitians can say that they unless active duty, of course, or in the military and stuff, saying that you went to Afghanistan for nutrition. And so can you just I really want to dive just deep into that role. Like, so first off, how did you kind of come across that opportunity?
So, and hopefully I won't disappoint you, but I actually didn't really do any nutrition work when I worked for Mercy Corps. I did intern with them during graduate school. So I am from Portland, Oregon, and they are based out of Portland, Oregon. So long story short, I had an internship at their home office, and then I was working on food security. So they do food security. And so after graduate school, I moved back and was hoping that they were going to grow their health unit. And I started doing program support, a desk officer type thing. And every so often something nutritional would come across my desk that I said, oh, I can help with that. I was very interested in having an overseas position. And so I was keeping my eye out outside of Mercy Corps, but nothing kind of really panned out. And then I was working as a desk officer on a regional desk that included Afghanistan. And so they needed someone to go out there for a new project and help sort of set up some of the structures. And I was like, well, don't look a gift horse in the mouth kind of thing. So it was a PR, so public relations reporting officer. And I committed to doing that for 6 months. And it was an agriculture project, so there was that angle at least, but also income generation, trying to move people away from farming poppies and finding other ways to earn income and get irrigation going and other products and job opportunities.
Definitely. And I'm sure a lot of those skills still transferred into a dietetics related career or certain skills that you cultivated in that role. And so first, was there anything, I mean, of course, picking up and moving to Afghanistan for 6 months, that's a challenge in of itself, but was there anything challenging you experienced outside of that with your time there?
So yes, as it does not come as a surprise, but Afghanistan has security issues. And so our mobility was very limited. At one point, I was actually living and working in the same building. So you get up in the morning and go downstairs to your office. And so you could easily never leave a building because there was the cook and there was the cleaner. The cook would go do the grocery shopping. And, if you did want to go to the grocery store or to the main office, you had to call and have a driver come. I was fortunate that I was able to travel to some other provinces where our project was actually taking place. One we would fly to and one we would drive to. But even there, in these other areas outside of Kabul, our mobility was still very limited on where we could go safely.
Gotcha. And also, like during your time there, was there anything eye-opening or new you discovered, whether it was about different cultures or even about yourself and your personal interests, that you kind of use and applied to future roles that you did after that?
I mean, it was really my first exposure to how we were what's called a sub-awardee, sub-grantee on the project. And so how each partner interacts with the grant holder and the donor, who was USAID, and how they call them expatriates, but how like for Americans, whatever, are there. And then, but there's also most employees are Afghan, and just the how that all works, how that all plays out, and the relationships, and how you are successful.
Definitely. And so after that role in Afghanistan, what kind of transitioned you out of that role and into your next career after that?
So I did commit to 6 months, and yes, living there was hard, but I also had just kind of gotten to the point where I really wanted to use my nutrition background, my nutrition interests, and I was like, this isn't happening in this way. So I had the opportunity to move to the Washington, D.C. area, because I knew that was where all the NGOs at least have an office, if not their home office. And that's where all the jobs are, and that's where everything happens. And so pretty much I found someone to replace me in Afghanistan, and I left Mercy Corps, and I moved to Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., and just started, everybody hates the word networking, but networking and interviewing and attending everything I could, and conferences, speaking events, and things like that, trying to get the lay of the land. And informational interviews is the key term.
Definitely. And I think especially being out of the country for so long and kind of not only getting back to America, but also back into the dietetics profession, the best thing that you could probably do is just completely throw yourself into anything and everything that you can relating to dietetics. And so when you got back into becoming a dietitian in America, what was your first job that you were able to get?
So I worked for an organization called Project Hope. And it was this interesting combination of my backgrounds, because before I went to graduate school, I was a pediatric diabetes educator. That was what I did for a couple years in between getting my RD and going to grad school. And so, I had worked in diabetes. And this organization did a lot with they did a lot with a lot of things, but chronic disease and diabetes and heart disease. And their CEO was a doctor, and their donors were pharmaceutical companies, and they childhood prevention of obesity, those kind of projects, which are not very common. And so I did that for a couple years, because it was just like, it's international and it's diabetes. So it was really interesting. Like, there was a project where they were training diabetes educators in India, which was a position that didn't exist previously. So it was, taking people who, either had some sort of degree in health or who were nurses, and training them up to be diabetes educators. So that was an example of one of the projects.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so was there anything with your time in Afghanistan that it just doesn't even have to be directly, but that you applied to that role in the diabetes, like international educator, that role as a dietitian?
Not so much. I suppose it was less about the dietetics and more about the role that I had in Afghanistan was about monitoring. I didn't quite get to the evaluation part, but monitoring. So setting up those systems that you have indicators and you can measure progress and measure success, and helping or coaching our staff in these various countries where we worked on having that same structure set up, like how you do your quarterly reports and how you report on number of people trained, or if it was, children and obesity, like how the obesity levels changed over time and that sort of thing, or knowledge changed over time.
Yeah, and I think it's still a great note to make where even if you're not, and I think this is great for either second career or second degree RD2Bs, where an experience doesn't have to be dietetics related to apply it to the dietetics field, because I'm sure you got a lot of soft skills from that experience in Afghanistan, and still you were getting that global international part of like passion that you had regardless, and then kind of using the throwing yourself in with networking, connecting with as many people as you could in the Washington DC area to get you that job. So when you moved from Afghanistan back to America, you said that you kind of had to throw yourself into forming connections and just meeting new people, especially in the dietetics field. And so can you tell us the process that you kind of went through to make those connections and new networks in the dietetics field?
Sure. So when I was moving there, I basically figured out everybody I knew who worked in the area, and also reached out to others I knew who may know people who worked in the area. And essentially it was like cold call, cold email, what have you, and just, this is who I am, and I'm new to the area. I'm looking at opportunities. I would love to get together for coffee or have a phone call and pick your brain about what's going on right now. If you know of any openings, any new, projects that are starting, that sort of thing. And I have to say, this is the one thing about, well, not the one thing, but this is something that's very good about DC, is everybody has done this. And so everybody is willing to do this, because everybody has had this time when they've, like reached out to this person or reached out to that person, or so when someone comes to you and it's like, oh, I just graduated from grad school, or I'm doing this internship right now, but I'd like to hear about what you do, or, what's it like, or, you always say yes, or you always answer questions because you've been there yourself. Yeah, and then when you talk to that person and at the end you say, is anybody else that you think I should talk to? And they'll say, oh yeah, I know someone who works at this organization, or I know someone who works at that organization, let me reach out to them.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing to note with networking, is it's like a network where you just bounce off of, okay, this person knows that person, and it's kind of making that intention of, I want to build my network so I can, it's not taking advantage of that person's network, it's leveraging. It's using the resources that you have and then building off of that. And so with those connections and things that you made, were you ever nervous about putting yourself out there, or did you have any anxious, was there any struggles that you had with putting yourself out there and reaching out to certain people?
I suppose when it was someone that I was considering, quote unquote, high up in an organization, or in the government or something like that, it was a little intimidating. And I mean, not every call was answered, but most were. As one of my former Mercy Corps colleagues, who was at the time working in DC, she said, network shamelessly. That was her advice. So you just kind of go, okay, well, they can say no, and that's not a problem. So yeah, so and it's also, you be respectful of people's time, and you be appreciative, and that sort of thing. So it wasn't too bad. It wasn't too bad. And it was a nice way to get out and about and learn about DC, walking around and just getting to know like the actual physical environment too.
Definitely. And I think a great thing to take from the pandemic is because like what you mentioned, oh, what was great about living in DC? Well, what's great is that with the pandemic, you can connect with someone who lives in DC that you live 6 hours away from, but through LinkedIn or other social media, you can still find ways to reach out. So it was great that you were able to network even then successfully, but just think with like a current RD2Bs and stuff with social media, they can even expand it that much more. And so going more into kind of international and global, that kind of topic. So finding connections and with connections. So finding those job opportunities that you had on the international scale, especially in nutrition. When RD2Bs think about that, it can be a little intimidating just because you're thinking of global health, like improving not only one specific part of the world, but the entire world. And so for RD2Bs that are interested in it, do you have any advice for them about kind of tackling the whole global scale of nutrition and how they can get involved in that topic?
Yeah, I strongly urge people to do internships, fellowships, graduate school, Peace Corps, all these things that really get you exposed and help you understand how it all works. Like, who are the funders? That there's the funding. Some of the funding, and most of the funding is government, but it's not all government. There's also foundations. There's private sector. So there's a variety, and then there's other countries' governments too. So just understanding that and how different organizations work together. It's almost always a consortium, if it's above a certain amount of money, and how those different organizations work together. There's consultants for sure, single individuals, but for the most part, it's going to be as part of an organization. And getting that experience of, yeah, I know it's like, how do you get the job without the experience? How do you get the experience without the job? It is the conundrum. But these sort of entry level ways is really what I think is the way to go, even if it's like being a desk officer, but you're in an organization that does nutrition is the important part, so that you're exposed to it and can get involved that way and learn from, a mentor or something. You may not find a position that's like, oh, nutritionist. Those are few and far between. But yeah, that would be my.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like that first, even if it's not a nutrition related global or international job, with that knowledge, and I feel like you use it as well in your roles. If you come across something that can have nutrition implemented into it or have that dietetic component added to it, you can still use your job as a way to get leverage again through that role. And so with your experience in both Afghanistan and your roles here, you've done a lot of stuff about food insecurity, agriculture, public health, global, pretty much anything involving uplifting underrepresented groups of people. And so do you feel like out of those areas of nutrition, do you feel like whether it's in the educational part of an RD2B going through school or just in the dietetics profession at all, that you feel like it's severely underrepresented, or you feel like needs to be talked more about and kind of just brought to more attention with people?
Yeah, there's so many aspects of nutrition in development. And I noticed, like, I didn't even know, even with my graduate degree, I didn't know until I started working in it. One of the areas it's sort of like my pet interest, is with nutrition related chronic disease, or they call it non-communicable disease, or NCDs, because it's an acronym. And that is an area that there's a small group of feisty people out there who really want to bring that to the attention of, global health and funders and health systems, marketers, all these things. But it's had a horrible time getting a foothold. There was a UN summit in 2011, and everybody thought, this is it. It's all about NCDs. It's going to happen. And here we are a decade later, and not much has changed, which is unfortunate. And even to the point where I think it was the World Health Organization came up with these things called the double duty interventions. I think it's interventions. And it's basically, there's so many things that are being done there for malnutrition in terms of, underweight or small for gestational age babies or, failure to thrive, things like that, that really apply to prevention of overweight and obesity, again, being one of the, indicators for or risk factors for NCDs later on. And even that hasn't been able to get a foothold. Like people are like, no, we don't have to like do it over here. We can integrate it in and everybody will benefit. So I think that's been an issue, doing more with prevention and less focus on just treatment and health systems. And then the other thing, one of the latest, not latest, but has gotten a lot of attention is food systems. So that is like the real big picture versus like, individual nutrition counseling. So I think if food systems and, drivers of food systems and what are the things that the cause and effect of different aspects of the food system that either enable or are barriers to healthy diets.
And when you talk about food systems, are you referring to like the distribution or kind of like how it reaches certain populations, or can you go a bit more in depth about what the topic of food systems entails?
Sure. I've been actually working on it a lot recently, so I feel very well versed.
Applicable. Yeah.
It's almost too big, but it makes sense. It makes sense to look what they call systems thinking, like how are things impacted or are impacting other things in a system. So the way that food systems is being thought of by many different entities, USAID included, is so you have like your sort of supply and demand part of the food system. And so that's all your production, what they call the food environment, where people obtain their food, and then food and water use. Basically, that's more sort of the household individual level, like their knowledge or, water safety or intra-household dynamics, things like that. And there's all these drivers that affect all these different parts of that food system, whether it's your production, your post-harvest handling, your food loss, your, the food safety in the markets, the health promotion, information that maybe vendors are using, things like that. And all those drivers, are like globalization, policies and institutions and social norms and public health systems and all these things that impact what people eat and how they're able to, use what they eat, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And so with all of those like topics and things that you delved into, because definitely I didn't know. I didn't know much about food systems. And so for those topics that you just covered that you feel like don't have that much representation or aren't getting addressed like they should, do you think there's anything that RD2Bs or nutrition students could do or start now as a student that could maybe carry them into the dietetics field or kind of help them put their foot forward in making an impact with the things that you mentioned?
I think a lot of it is maybe self-education, or if you have independent projects in the coursework, that just really looking at the things that interest you, whether it's NCDs or whether it's gender, that's a huge area, gender or youth engagement. These are the cross-cutting themes, or climate. Climate's another huge one. So if you can kind of choose your own adventure and it's not part of the coursework, then having these whether you're writing a paper or presentations or things like that, and maybe even part of that you can interview somebody from some organization or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And do you also have like resources that you recommend for students who kind of like with getting that information specifically on like the global international scale, like where they could go to for that?
Something I think is really good, and I'm a little biased, but it is still good. My organization is a subcontractor on a project called USAID Advancing Nutrition, and part of the mandate of Advancing Nutrition is that they they create and also bring together resources about nutrition. And it's all 100% about nutrition, but it's all different types. It's behavioral change, it's gender, it's health systems, it's breastfeeding, it's there's some things on nutrition sensitive agriculture. And so their resource section of their website has all sorts of not just their own documents, but ones that they have curated from other sources as well. So it's kind of a one-stop shop.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. And I'm sure that because I feel like a lot of students, they just see, oh, go to the academy, like just kind of they siphon it all to the academy. And the academy is a great website for finding resources and like with DPGs and with networking, things like that. But also with RD2BE, we want to be able to amplify every resource out there. And so I think that's definitely a great, like what you said, one-stop shop for if you're doing that paper that you want to write on this very specific nutrition subject or things like that. And
one other thing though, I should, or the global member interest group would be very annoyed with me if I didn't say that dietetic students should also be members of the GMEG, the global member interest group.
And so actually, like we can talk about global member interest groups as well, because I feel like students hear more about the dietetic practice groups, but I do feel like member interest groups, it's not like they aren't heard of, but it's kind of, you hear DPG, that you don't hear of MIGs that much. And so could you go in depth about the global member interest group and kind of what you guys do?
Sure. So it's pretty new. I think it started about 3 years ago or 4 years ago. It took a little while to get it going. There was a couple RDs who were really just took the bull by the horns and made it happen. So we are official and have been for a couple years. I should be able to just rattle off the mission of it, but basically it's to gather resources and identify opportunities for dietitians to work and be informed about international nutrition, whether that's through volunteer work or whether that's through, there's a discussion board, and anytime I get so many listservs coming to my inbox that I just like, oh, here's an opportunity, here's an opportunity, here's an opportunity. So people are doing that. There's information on the discussion board about what does HOD stand for? Anyway, the delegates, House of Delegates, there we go. And so there's a lot of information there. Like I said, there's information in the tabs about nutrition, international nutrition resources, like not flashcards, the cards to do community counseling, guidance on various approaches, and things like that.
Awesome. And so our last question for you, it kind of encompasses a message to RD2Bs. And so if you were able to speak to whether it's one RD2B or all RD2Bs, is there any advice or things that you would want them to know, whether it's about the future of the profession, things that they should know as a student? It could literally range from any type of advice or things that you wish you knew.
Yeah, I don't know why I did not know about international development when I was, getting my dietetics degree. I don't think of myself as, living under a rock. I think probably now there's a lot more information flow, but I would say just, like I was saying, just get out there and start reading, start attending, like you said, with the pandemic, everything's online. So there's virtual, like there was a virtual, I don't even know what to call it, talk earlier today with the head of USAID, Samantha Power. She was talking, and the head of UNICEF was talking, and they were talking about, the great needs and what funders, there was a foundation also there talking about what they're going to do. So, these things are all out there. And, just kind of, if they are interested in international development, because they know what it is, unlike me, that it generally is beyond that sort of traditional one-on-one dietitian work, which I feel like is pretty prevalent in the US. It's generally, when you think of a dietitian, she's he or she is sitting down with, a client, and they're talking about needs and, whatever it is that person needs. Whereas this, I think, is more like public health, where you're looking more at, you could be looking at a household, but if you're working on a project, you're not just concentrating on one household, you're concentrating on 500 households. So it tends to be a much more broad scope.
Awesome. So thank you so much for sharing all your information, specifically regarding international nutrition. And it was just great advice you gave and your super interesting background. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.